This is one of the most recognisable bottles of whiskey in the world. Stunning shape, very classical, but it isn't what it used to be. And we're going to talk about why. So this is Balvenie 12 Doublewood. This is a 12-year-old minimum Scottish single malt, matured, distilled and fully produced at the Balvenie distillery in Scotland, and then it's aged in a combination of ex-American oak and ex-Spanish sherry oak, more than likely Oloroso, but maybe the odd touch of something else in there. It's 40% ABV, it isn't natural colour, and it is chill filtered. Now, I have a little bit of an experience with this bottle. I think when most people first start drinking whiskey, this brand is certainly something where most people will tell you, including Scotch whiskey specialists and whiskey specialists, this is a great introduction whiskey. That is still true to this day. It is still a very, very good introduction whiskey. The downside to that now is, like most things in the world, it's becoming a lot more expensive. And this is an unfair comparison, so my bias plays a lot into this, so I do apologise. But 10 years ago, you could have picked this whiskey up for £35, £36, something like that anyway. And you'd see it often in whiskey specialists, you'd see it often in supermarkets, a very, very easy thing to get a hold of. These days, and just to my right here on this big screen, I have got a standard retailer website up and someone who is considered to be the cheapest online whiskey retailer, typically in the UK. And we have a minimum pricing of £48 up to just under £54 a bottle. So a discrepancy of £6 either way really, which isn't a lot in the grand scheme of whiskey. And I understand production costs more these days and raw ingredients are more expensive, casks are significantly more expensive. But you know, for £50, you know, if we cut it through the middle, that's being a little bit fair, but this isn't a £50 bottle of whiskey. So let's talk about why. Now, Balvenie is famous for being a very honeyed, kind of oaty, sweet caramel kind of whiskey. Very similar to the Jamesons we reviewed last week. But the first time I ever tried this, I really liked it, but it was bordering on 13 years ago. And it was a bottle of whiskey where I was like, oh, that's sweet, I can drink that, that's fine. It's not smoky, it doesn't have loads of spice, etc, etc. And then rewind to, I don't want to show how old my friend is, but I went to a friend's 30th in Edinburgh, got the train up, we went to a really nice whiskey tasting in a whiskey bar, and I bought a miniature of this there. I was like, oh, I can drink that on the train home, wonderful. Was far too hungover on the train home the next day, so I waited till a couple of days later to try it, did, and it was really herbaceous and just bitter, and in my opinion not very well put together from a consumer perspective. I really didn't like it. And then this is the most recent bottle. Now I have gone through this quite a lot, but I've been studying purely for this video. Now I received this bottle, I want to say back in May or maybe even early June, and I have delayed doing this video to get a full idea of what this whiskey could do. So it sits here in the glass, and when I first opened this, it was one of the hottest drinking 40% whiskies I've ever come across. It drank like it was 60. It was so over the top spicy, and I couldn't understand why, because that isn't built into any of Balvenie's profile anywhere. They take such a small cut from their stills. They have a huge cask finishing program amongst all of their products pretty much. The most famous being the 14-year-old Caribbean cask with a rum finish, 21-year-old port finish, etc, etc. And I was like, spice and heat really isn't the Balvenie MO. Balvenie, in a way, I suppose, less now, but back in the day we're seeing like a very approachable style of Macallan. It's easy drinking, it's sweet. There's more bourbon cask used in Balvenie, but nonetheless it has a very Macallan sweet profile with less sherry. And now it was just so hot and over the top. Now that was when it was here. When we got to about here, something quite interesting happened. And it was something that I noted from watching quite a few videos from the guys at Whisky in the Six and Sipper Social Club, Jeremy and Rob. And they had mentioned that when Balvenie gets older, you tend to get these like black tea notes from it. And I did. When it got to like here, it became very grapefruit, almost passion fruit. And you got this beautiful, sweet, refreshing, but kind of drying tea note, which I was like, oh, we're on for something good here. And now we are where we are with it. Now I had a glass of this last night in a tumbler, Let's see what it's doing now. So, removing any bias from where we started to where we are, coming at this from a blank perspective, do you get a little bit of everything I've said on the nose? So the tea note is there. It's this crispness, it's this dryness, and there is still a little bit of that kind of grapefruit, passion fruit, very sweet, tropical, slightly bittersweet thing going on with it. But then there's a lot of intensity in the back of the nose, and when you take kind of a deep pull on this, it kind of feels like it's circulating around the top of my nose. You get this almost really heavy grain whiskey style aroma from it, which is quite funny because drinking that Jameson's last week, which does contain grain, the grain came across as sweet and approachable and a little bit woody. This is just coming across as, but there is something a little bit industrious to this, and it's quite off-putting, I must say. We do get like classic caramel, classic vanilla. Underneath that grapefruit note, you could almost say there's a little bit of lime, but let's taste it. Let's see where we're at. There's still so much heat to it. Now, I'm not normally one who's annoyed by a whiskey drinking a little bit hot. On the shelf behind me, a majority of stuff is cask strength, or at least 50% or above. So heat isn't necessarily something that I dislike at all, but it's not a Balvenie bullet point, if that makes sense. Now, I understand batches can always be off, and not every batch can always taste the same, and we have to just work that into our whiskey profile because distillers and blenders will try really hard to make everything exactly the same, but sometimes it's just out of your control. But this isn't the first time I've been disappointed with this product. That miniature I tried back in Edinburgh, or bought back in Edinburgh and tried later, it just really put me off the brand. As a separate note, don't want to turn this into any sort of rant, but Balvenie's pricing has been like unbelievable in the last couple of years. And the way they've just churned limited edition things out and put these pricings in place, which I thought were just absurd, if I'm being honest with you. They discontinued their 17-year-old. I was never a fan of it anyway. I thought it was just a really dull 17-year-old whiskey. So maybe I have some anti-Balvenie bias in all of this. But it is quite disappointing, I have to say. A caveat, if you've made it this far into the video, is that if you are looking to find an introductory whiskey, this could be something that you might like. But I'm thinking about, in the UK market now, if you have £50 to spend, what could you get? And the list is almost endless. If you want a sweet, easy drinking Speyside, there is Glenfiddich 12, Glenfiddich 15, Glenmorangie 12, Glenmorangie 15 might be a little bit over that price point now with some price adjustments, but nonetheless it's still there. If you want a sherry bomb, you can get Glenallachie 12 for under £50 a bottle. God, what's on these shelves? If you want something that's a little bit spicy and a little bit coastal, you can get the regular release of Ardnamurchan Merkin. You can go, I mean, bourbon-wise, we've got tons of things on here. Jameson's Black Barrel from last week. You could get Redbreast 12-year-old. You could get... Anyway, the list is getting bigger. I think, from the perspective of this brand, £50 a bottle for what seems to be, not just in my opinion, but in some other whiskey reviewers' opinions as well, something which is really taking quite a fall from grace. I haven't analysed Balvenie's sales figures. I don't know how well they're doing compared to other brands, but just falling quite flat, must say. And even with these grapefruit notes and these tea notes and these other things, I'm not enjoying this product. Like, I'm looking at what is left in this glass, and not for the first time, but in a very rare time, I don't particularly want to finish this. It has none of that elegance, which I know Balvenie to have had back in the day. And I don't mean 20, 30 years ago, I mean 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Like, their core range was all about honey, sweetness, decadence. It was rich and great after dinner style of whiskey. Whereas this is just a bit meh, you know. Going in quite harsh on this one, gonna give it a 6 out of 10. Not something I would ever really buy again in its current state or form, but that's probably not a view that all of you watching this hold. If you have any good points to tell me about Balvenie, please put them below. If you have similar thoughts, please put them below. But yeah, Balvenie 12 Double Wood, 6 out of 10, not fantastic. I'll see you all next week for something very classical. Cheers.